Alan Bates, who was our rhythm guitar player, went to the same school as me, and he knew that I played the drums because in music class, sometimes they get me to get up and do a solo at the end of the class and so on. So it was known that I played the drums. And at that time, the Squires was forming. There was Ken Coblin and Neil Young and Alan Bates. And another fellow by the name of Jack Harper, who is a good friend of Neil's, he is to this day, who played the drums. And as the band was forming, it appeared that Jack couldn't be fully committed because if they had engagements, he may not be able to make them. So he sort of let them know that. So Al Bates approached me in school, and then Neil and Al and Ken Coblin came over to my house and had a little audition with me. And about 3 days later at school, Al says to me, "You're in, you're a Squire." At first it was basically other people's music. And as far as playing, you would probably play whatever you had to get a job somewhere, because it was, getting started in that business, as you're probably aware, it's getting your first engagements and building on that. In fact, our first engagement, we played at Riverview Community Club, and if I remember right, we got paid $5, period. But that's okay. We were really excited because we got to play in front of somebody. It wasn't a matter of the money. We wanted to get this name out and who we were, and it went over quite well. Neil was writing with the band at fairly early stages. Like most bands then were playing basically other people's music. But it wasn't that long that a large portion of our material was his music. And at first it was instrumentals. Later on, he started to put vocals to them. And so as a group, we got along really well, and I think it came through in our music, and I think that's partly why we were well received. I guess you could say I'm prejudiced, but it seemed like the crowds really liked our music, and playing for them was a lot of fun. Like we really enjoyed playing. There was really no arguing amongst us and so on. Neil was the leader, especially because he was writing the songs and he was starting to sing and everything. And I think that Neil always followed his own way. And I mean, you can be influenced by things, but he wrote the music he wanted to write. And we were quite confident in his abilities and everything. We were quite content to play his music, where some bands may not be back then, may not be adventurous enough to maybe try the music in front of a crowd. But we were pretty confident with his music. He knew what he wanted to do, and that it would come across well, and it generally did. When the Sultan and Aurora came out, when we played those songs, the crowd, they all come running up to the stage and everything. So obviously they liked his music. Neil couldn't read music, but he seemed to have a really good understanding of it, and his music was very pleasing. Now it changed through the years, not that it's not pleasing later on. And there was some variation to his music. It wasn't like everything was the same. It really wasn't. There was no doubt about Neil's aspirations. Neil was a committed musician and songwriter, and I think Neil knew that at a pretty young age. And we were all musicians, and it was a good time playing in the band and everything. Probably at that stage, we didn't know exactly where we were going to go, If it turned out we ended up in the music industry, so be it. But we weren't as committed to it at that point, because you keep in mind that a couple of us were still in school. We were still in high school. And what happened is, back in those days in the summertime, it was very hard to get any work as a band. It was, people were off school, they'd gone to the lake and everything and so on. And Neil and myself were going up to a place called Falcon Lake in his mother's car. They're just going up for the day, and I think Neil probably had something in mind, although we didn't really talk about it that much. He'd probably been talking to this, there was a hotel and bar up there and everything. And halfway up there, the car stalled on it. It was his mother's car. And it was kind of a funny story because we were halfway there and a fellow came along and towed us all the way back to Winnipeg, right to his house. And I don't know if you know it, but Neil always liked Cadillacs. Well, this guy was driving a big Cadillac. Anyway, just on the side. Anyway, we went back to Winnipeg, and then Neil went back up to Falcon Lake later on his own. And he was up there for, I think, a couple of days, and gave us a call and said, get all the equipment, all expenses paid, get everything up here. We're going to start playing this weekend, and we're going to play up here for a week. Well, a couple of us sort of had plans that weekend, but also we had summer jobs, so it wasn't as easy for us to just pack up and go to the lake. Although I guess, in fairness to Neil, we maybe could have tried harder to see if we could get the time off, but it's hard to get time off in a summer job. You're only working for 2 months. So anyway, I said, I think it was me that he talked to, and I talked to Al and everything. I said, I don't think that we could make it up to play. So Neil said, fine, and I could tell he was irritated, and he hung up. Next time we saw him in Winnipeg, he said, okay, he says, we're going to finish our engagements, then we're breaking up. And in retrospect, I understand his frustration. I mean, he's committed. In fact, at that point, I think Neil had actually quit school, so he knew where he wanted to go. And if something like that comes up and all of a sudden your band's not going to show up to play, so I can understand that. But in the end, we all ended up friends. I mean, there was an unhappy moment there. We kind of split up equipment that belonged to so-and-so, and then there was a little struggle on who the Squires were after that. Al Bates and myself and Ken were together, and we were going to keep the Squires name, and Neil was going to keep it, and then eventually it went to Neil. And then years later we met, and obviously there's no animosity or anything like that. So anyway, I understand what Neil was going through at that time. When you're that committed, you need people around you committed as well. So that's how the band broke up.